Welcome back, everyone. You're here with Goldberg. Today I wanted to talk about this political fixation on automation. I always figured it was the byproduct of a gross misunderstanding and exaggeration, and it turns out I'm more or less correct. It's a tremendous misapprehension of a particular study. And what happens is people who don't read anything, i.e., politicians, will grab onto it because it makes for good politics and they're trying to win votes. Well, this is a piece from The Economist, Schumpeter, talking about an accidental doom monger. And he goes and he interviews or he gathers the work of one of the main researchers from the project, Frey. This is the Oxford study that came out with 47% of occupations might be automated. Well, people took that as saying these might be automated. People took it as they're all going to be automated and there's a sinister plan to go after us. And no, just chill with your exaggeration. Chill with your, partisan zeal for these whole thing. It's destined to happen. In 10 years, the planet's going to be on fire if we don't have a carbon tax, or Y2K is happening. What are you going to do? I remember those days. I remember all the people stockpiling food and buying books and whatnot. That was pretty fascinating to observe. So, what did this study actually say? Well, they modeled the characteristics is key, of 702 occupations and classified them according to their susceptibility to computerization. And, of course, this classification was based upon an automated algorithm of sorts. They said in the study, we make no attempt to estimate how many jobs will actually be automated. That, they underscore, will depend upon many other things such as cost, regulatory concerns, political pressure, and social resistance. Okay? Just because a job might be automated does not mean it is going to be automated. You have to pay attention to the base, the primary source, not just what your politician says or what some public figure says, because they may not have actually read it themselves. Now, you have people like Martin Ford, who came out with these books where he worries that middle-class jobs will vanish, economic mobility will cease, and wealth plutocracy could shut itself away in gated communities or in elite cities, perhaps guarded by autonomous military robots and drones. The unemployed masses will subsist on universal basic income. And this is actually not what their opinion is. They're not saying the government has no role in managing, but they actually suspect that automation is not going to advance because you're going to have this massive backlash. And it's not hard to see why that might be. So looking at that to start with, this is what one of the people who worked on the actual study is saying. Chill out a little bit to begin with. But going beyond that, we have to address a couple of points, and then I'll get into some of the reasons why I don't suspect automation is going to be that big of a deal. Or certainly it will happen, but it's always happened on some scale. That does not mean it's the end of the world and we all need to start collecting paychecks from the government. So let's just look at a couple of these things you'll hear. Number one, it is unprecedented. Okay, I hate to tell you this, but unprecedented, that's most of human technological and economic and social history. Things were unprecedented. Major shifts and changes happened. The reason they'll use terms like this is because a lot of progressives in particular, they watch Star Wars, Disney, Marvel Avengers. They like to believe that their boring lives are actually in some, doomsday scenario where you've got to make this move or things are going to fall apart. And just, again, chill out a little bit. Think about it for a second. Before Egypt developed irrigation, well, you probably had people that had to carry buckets of water. Maybe they were slaves or not. Once you develop irrigation, you don't need as much manpower for that. Did that mean that the Egyptian economy collapsed entirely? No. Just because you develop a new technology does not mean that you completely unemploy everyone who might have worked that job. Some of them will get new jobs related to technology. Others will go into different professions. It's not oh my God, it's the end of the world. And that's why these extreme scenarios, again, just pump the brakes a little bit. We saw it with feudalism. When it went from feudalism, you were maybe a serf. Your livelihood depended on farming land that belonged to a noble. And then you went to, a lot of folks working in factories, for instance. Now, you probably had folks back then who was a serf and I don't want to work in a factory. What's going to happen if you were a serf? major changes occur, and these are dramatic. Just think of how many people were farmers 100, 150 years ago, and now that's shifted. Oh, by the way, though, if you're one of those people who says that we need to value our own labor and not have to work all the time, why don't you become a farmer? There's a huge shortage of farmers in this country. No one wants to sign up for it. As a progressive, you could do that, and you could enjoy the product of your own labor. It's just a suggestion. But yeah, a lot of people used to work on farms, then they started working in offices. The fact that you have such a fundamental and radical change does not mean that now everyone's going to die by the wayside because you don't give them a government check. All right. So again, look at history before you start waving around that this has never happened before. I think these folks tend to have a scarcity mindset in that they don't believe that whatever is within their immediate periphery can change. They don't believe that they can do something apart from this particular job. And it's like, look, changing, adding new specializations, learning new things, shifts in the economy, that has happened from time immemorial. All right? You don't need to treat it like it is a doomsday scenario. And it's not just poor people, by the way. If you've watched Downton Abbey, that is based upon a lot of the historical change that went on, where some of these nobles, if they had those big estate systems, then they didn't make forays into business, they didn't make proper investments. Yeah, some of them lost all their wealth. They lost their property, right? You have to be able to adapt to a certain extent. And of course, there are ways the government can step in, perhaps, and assist people if you believe that it has that role. But it's not on the level of, oh my God, now we have to all be on the dole. So moving forward on that, okay, rich people talk about automation, therefore we need to listen to rich people like Elon Musk. Funny enough, 8 years ago, it was all about millionaires and billionaires. Well, we can't, trust these people because they've ruined the economy in the country. And now we're supposed to listen to them because they're giving us advice on automation, right? Elon Musk, I should note, he's a visionary, obviously. He's not a particularly good businessman. I mean, he has a highly inflated stock price, but as far as the company itself doing well financially, that's quite debatable. But of course, if you're a rich person and you can get guaranteed money injected into the economy and you sell any sort of consumer product, yeah, you're going to support that. How many of them were against the stimulus package? How many of them were railing against the Wall Street bailout or the auto bailout? If you can have guaranteed money that goes into the economy, in this case, to consume in the consumer capitalist system. If we give everyone a check every month, they're going to go out and consume in the consumer capitalist system, while at the same time they're complaining the consumer capitalist system is creating sweatshops and degrading the environment. It's like, okay, right? Yes, rich people, if you sell products, yes, you want guaranteed money injected into the economy because it's to your benefit. That doesn't mean that it's necessary. That doesn't mean that it is important that we go that route. Okay. And then let's talk about a couple of the factors that I think kind of diminish the relevance of, oh my God, we all need to be on checks. First of all, consider the fact that the federal government spending is like 20% of GDP. Now, if you incorporate state and local governments, contractors, subcontractors, people who aren't funded directly by taxpayer money, but may in fact be supporting people who are funded by taxpayers, it would be a lot higher. And you can expect that to grow. You hear like, oh, the Republicans are going to cut stuff. No. The Republicans, what they do is they move government money from maybe civil service employees, they get a bunch of contractors. That's just going to expand, okay? Government usually does not shrink in the United States, and I don't expect that to change going forward. So, number one, as long as government is issuing money, you have to realize, as a government contractor, you don't really have much motivation to automate and reduce your staff because you can charge the government for every person you employ. So yeah, you want more employees, even if you say this job isn't really worth anything. Well, I'm just going to give it a fancy title and some responsibilities because then I can upcharge the government for it. This happens all the time. You have to understand how contracting works. So on that side, you've got more government encroachment in the economy and a lot of even private sector industries which are heavily dependent on the government, even indirectly. So yeah, everyone's going to lose their job. I mean, we already have the government taking over a lot of the economy. Not terribly likely there. The next point is, there's Graeber's book on BS jobs. He's a left-wing anarchist himself, but he had some interesting points in that you see even in the private sector, where the private sector is about efficiency. No, the private sector is oftentimes bloated bureaucracy. In fact, the point I was going to make, they said like bank tellers, banks are going to all be automated. I can't tell you how many times I walk into a bank now, and it's not just they have tellers, but they've got this little desk at the very front of the bank when you step in. It's usually some cute girl there who's like a concierge. So it's like, why are you adding positions as everyone's going to be automated? Well, because some jobs exist simply to send a message about who you are and how great and powerful and successful your firm happens to be. Just like you go into Walmart, you might see the Vietnam vet at the front saying, hey, welcome to Walmart, have a nice day. Well, there's no point for a job like that. That'll be automated. Yeah, but it says a lot to have a veteran out there. Oh, we support our veterans. Oh, we care about you, that we say hi when you come in. The whole thing of, millennials are antisocial, they don't care about that. You cannot undermine, you cannot devalue the importance of human connection. Why do we still have people canvassing door to door for elections, right? Everything should just be on social media. Because people do appreciate that. You take the most socially recluse person and you express interest in them, the likelihood is they're going to respond on a positive basis. So companies see that. Companies will employ folks, even if it's not necessarily like they don't serve a major purpose, they'll employ them just because of their image. And they have administrator positions. A lot of these that serve no purpose, they don't even work throughout the day, but it makes the company look good on the scale of like social perception or whatnot. So even there, if you have private sector firms, large and small, that are willing to employ people for no reason, what makes you think they're all of a sudden going to start automating, right? Some of them just like the bloat because they think it makes them look, well regarded and a central player in society. What's the other one? If I can find it here. Oh yeah. So okay, then we have the question of employment or non-employment. So let's assume, taking out the fact that, for instance, with these retail companies, if you automate and get rid of all these retail employees, let's say you work at a shoe store or you work at a department store, if you automate a lot of those positions, you're losing a lot of money that's then reinvested in your store, because your employees are like the first people who buy food, consumer products, especially if you're a brand like a retail store. If you're eliminating all of that, you are cutting off a certain chunk of your own sales. But beyond that, think about it. If they do in fact have a bunch of people thrown out of work on a large scale, what happens when a bunch of people are economically disenfranchised, they don't have income, they don't have a place to go? Usually, revolution happens, or a lot of crime towards rich people. So if you want to avoid that, if you want to have a safer society where you can coexist, if you are like power elite of sorts, you're going to occupy their time. Even if it's with a low-wage job, you'd rather have that than them just sitting there being resentful because you have the resources and they do not. Now, even if you give them a small check, though, if that check's not enough for them to subsist on, because bear in mind, they'll say, no, people aren't going to stop working if we give them a basic income. But at the same time, you're claiming all this automation is happening. The automation is also going to affect certain better paying jobs, if you actually believe what these people are saying. At the same time, every person who advocates for an automation response supports pretty much open borders. We need more high-tech labor. We need more people. In other words, you're taking away opportunities for those who might be thrown out of their work, thrown out of jobs, so they can sit there on like $1,000 a month or whatever, $500 a month. They can sit there while other people are taking those other jobs, so they don't have much upward mobility, even if you're giving them a little bit. That just creates more resentment. What do you think is going to happen? Well, you have a bunch of people, especially young people, with time on their hands, getting a stipend from the government. That can also foment revolution. In fact, Graeber notes there was this girl in the UK pushing for basic income. She wanted like $25,000 a year for everyone. And she said it would help her do her radical feminist activism if she could just get checks from the government. So yeah, a lot of it's that kind of goes back to that, progressive, well, if you didn't have to work, you could be involved politically. Do you think the power elite really wants a bunch of people with free time just, doing political activism? No, probably not. They'd rather have you working a useless job that occupies your time so you're not thinking about what they are doing, right? Keep the masses blind, keep the masses satisfied. That's what the key is. You read throughout history, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, and then we of course have the fact, the reason I don't think that automation is a big deal also is because you have had a government response already. I mean, when we talk about educational requirements, licenses for particular jobs, that helps protect the income because there's less competition. With automation, you're probably going to see something like this. So, they're going to automate all the truck drivers. And you think the Teamsters are just going to sit on their hands? No, they're going to lobby the boomer politicians. And all it's going to really take, by the way, is you have a couple of these self-driven trucks, robot trucks, that crash, that screw up and kill someone else on the road. I've known some people with the intelligent driving features that those things have malfunctioned, almost caused accidents. All it takes is a couple of accidents with these trucks, and there'll be lawsuits, and then the feds are going to say, all these trucks need to have a human in them at all times. It's kind of like monitoring, overseeing. In fact, they were talking about on the radio a couple months ago, they said that it's okay for them to be robotically driven on the highway, but when they get to a city, a human has to take over because the robots don't understand city traffic. They can't compensate and whatnot. That's a big deal, okay? If you have at that point you're going to have, okay, we'll just keep them in there the entire time. So maybe they'll try to cut the salaries of the workers, but the idea that they're going to completely remove them, you don't understand how much is tied up politically. No, the government's going to start passing laws and saying, well, you have to employ humans in this particular profession, or like the Postal Service. Main reason the Postal Service has not basically fallen apart versus other competition is because they have a monopoly on delivering letters. That's what's pretty much kept them alive. So yeah, you'll probably have the government create a law, just like they did in Jersey with the service station attendants. You can't pump your own gas, or you're not supposed to officially, in order to protect an entire industry. That's what's liable to happen in this country with automation. So, we bring this up because you have to be careful with all this kind of radicalism. It's not based upon reality half the time. As I said, it's based upon a misunderstanding. So when you see a scary looking figure like 47% are going to be automated, read the actual study. Don't listen to the politicians, because they may not even understand, or they might be misrepresenting it for their own personal benefits.